The photograph was a masterpiece of domestic terrorism, a quiet declaration of war waged not with a bomb, but with a smartphone camera and a smirk. It wasn't just a picture, it was a violation, an invasion that went deeper than stolen jewels or broken locks. It showed a woman, not the wife, lounging on a bed of fret linens, a silk nightgown slipping from her shoulder. But the real horror, the detail that turned a simple betrayal into an act of profound desecration, was the background, the unmistakable midnight blue wall of the master bedroom, and hanging above the headboard, the one-of-a-kind Rothko that belonged to the wife's grandfather. The mistress wasn't just in her husband's bed. She was in her life, mocking her from the heart of her sanctuary. And she made one fatal mistake. She posted it. The wife, she didn't just see it. She owned the newspaper that would make it immortal. Elizabeth Davenport Rosenthal lived a life curated to perfection, a series of exquisite moments framed by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Fifth Avenue penthouse. From that vantage point, Central Park was a manicured emerald carpet rolled out for her viewing pleasure. Her world was one of quiet opulence, of hushed conversations in Michelin-starred restaurants, of the soft click of a custom Birkin bag being placed on a marble tabletop. She was a Davenport, a name synonymous with old New York money, a dynasty built on steel and railroads, now managed through a labyrinth of trusts and hedge funds. Her father, the formidable Conrad Davenport, was less a man and more a city institution. Her husband, Clorinda Rosenthal, was by contrast a creation of his own. A brilliant architect with a dazzling smile and a portfolio of sleek, modernist towers that pricked the skyline, he was the charismatic counterpart to Elizabeth's reserved elegance. They were to the society pages and the charity gala circuit the perfect couple beauty brains and a billion-dollar legacy. Clorinda had been her one act of rebellion. The Davenports married other Davenports or their European equivalents. They did not marry ambitious boys from Boston with scholarships and sharp suits. But Clorinda had charmed Conrad, a feat few men could claim, and he had utterly captivated Elizabeth. For 10 years their marriage had been its own kind of architectural marvel, a structure of shared ambitions, mutual respect, and a quiet, comfortable affection. But lately, Elizabeth had begun to notice hairline fractures in the foundation. It started with the small things, the telltale clichés she'd always read about with detached amusement. The phone that was suddenly always face down, the late nights at the office that stretched into the early morning, explained away with a sigh about demanding clients from Dubai or Shanghai. The scent on his Loro Piana cashmere jacket that wasn't his Tom Ford cologne or her Chanel No. 5. It was something sweeter, younger. Something cheap. Elizabeth was not a woman prone to hysterics. Panic was a foreign language to her. Instead, a cold, methodical curiosity took hold. She treated the problem as she would a hostile takeover bid. At one of her father's companies, she gathered intelligence. She didn't stoop to checking his phone. It was an act she considered beneath her. Instead, she made a call to a discreet firm recommended by her father's head of security. The firm was called Veritas Solutions, and its principal was a quiet, unassuming woman named Ms. Harding, whose grey pantsuits and sensible shoes belied a terrifying efficiency. "I need to understand my husband's schedule when he is not with me," Elizabeth stated, her voice as calm and clear as the diamond on her finger. There was no emotion, no tremor. It was a business transaction. "I require a full accounting. Discretion is, of course, the paramount concern." Ms. Harding simply nodded. "We are a ghost, Mrs. Rosenthal. You will receive a secure file every Friday. The first few reports were mundane. Lunches with clients at the grill, site visits downtown, after-work drinks with his partners at the King Cole Bar. Elizabeth almost allowed herself to feel a flicker of relief, a pang of guilt for her suspicion. Perhaps he was just stressed. Perhaps the distance she felt was a product of her own imagination. But then came the third Friday. The secure file contained a subfolder labeled Anomalies. Inside was a series of time-stamped photographs. Clorinda not at a client dinner, but entering a chic, discreet hotel in Soho the Mercer. An hour later, a young woman arrived. The camera angle was from across the street, but the image was sharp. She was striking in a way that was fashionable and loud, a stark contrast to Elizabeth's timeless aesthetic. She wore leather pants and a brash confidence. The report identified her as Kendra Shaw, a junior curator at a contemporary art gallery in Chelsea. The report detailed their meetings over the past month, 3, sometimes 4 times a week. Hotel rooms, rented apartments, a weekend trip to a boutique hotel in the Hamptons, explained to Elizabeth as a design conference. Each photograph, each data point, was a small, precise incision into the heart of her marriage. Elizabeth stared at the screen, her posture unwavering, her expression unreadable. She felt no rage, not yet. That would come later. For now, there was only a profound, chilling clarity. The structure she had built her life around was a facade. And she, Elizabeth Davenport Rosenthal, was about to become the architect of its demolition. The affair was a vulgarity, a common sort of betrayal she would expect from a different class of man. But Elizabeth knew Clorinda. He was meticulous, a man who obsessed over details, over appearances. For him to be this careless suggested an arrogance that was far more insulting than the infidelity itself. He believed he was untouchable. He believed she was complacent. Miss Harding's reports continued to arrive, each one more damning than the last. The PI's team was thorough. They had gained access to Kendra Shaw's social media. Most of it was public, a carefully curated feed of art gallery openings, fashionable friends, and a life designed to inspire envy. But the real intelligence was in the private layers. Kendra had a close friends list on Instagram, a smaller circle for her more candid, boastful moments. It was a digital VIP room, and Ms. Harding's operative, a young woman who could blend seamlessly into the Chelsea art scene, had gotten herself on the list. It was a Tuesday morning. Elizabeth was in the library of her penthouse, a vast 2-story room, panelled in dark mahogany. The air smelled of old books and fresh peonies. She was reviewing the quarterly earnings report for the New York Chronicle, the newspaper her father had bought for her as a wedding present. Most people had seen it as a rich girl's toy. Elizabeth had seen it as a weapon. In 5 years, she had transformed it from a declining legacy paper into a formidable, feared publication known for its incisive political commentary and devastating financial exposés. It was her domain, the one part of her life that was unequivocally hers, not a Davenport inheritance or a Rosenthal partnership. Her phone buzzed with a secure notification, a new file from Veritas Solutions. The subject line was a single word: urgent. Elizabeth opened the file. It contained only one item, a screenshot. The image hit her with the force of a physical blow. It was taken from Kendra Shaw's private Instagram story, posted just an hour before. The caption was cloying, feeling at home. The woman Kendra was propped up against a pile of pillows on a king-sized bed. She was wearing a delicate pale green silk and lace nightgown. Elizabeth's breath hitched. It was from La Perla, a gift Clorinda had given her for their last anniversary. She had never even worn it. Kendra's expression was a calculated mix of innocence and triumph, a smug little smile playing on her lips as she looked into her phone's camera. But it was the background that made Elizabeth's blood run cold. The deep, custom-mixed shade of Farrow and Ball paint on the wall, Hague blue. The matched set of antique silver reading lamps on the bedside tables, and there, centered perfectly above the upholstered headboard, was the painting. It was Mark Rothko's No. 14, 1960. A vast, sublime canvas of melancholic reds and deep maroons. It was not just a painting, it was her history. It had hung in her grandfather's study for 40 years before he bequeathed it to her, his favorite grandchild. It was the heart of their home, the silent witness to her entire married life. This wasn't just a dalliance. This was a conquest. Kendra wasn't just sleeping with her husband, she was claiming her space, her life, piece by piece. She had put on Elizabeth's nightgown, laid in Elizabeth's bed, and posed beneath Elizabeth's legacy, broadcasting her victory to her inner circle. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. For a long moment, Elizabeth couldn't move. The air in the room seemed to thin the silence roaring in her ears. The cold clarity she had maintained for weeks finally shattered, replaced by a surge of white-hot glacial rage. It was a fury so pure and so potent it felt like a source of power. This was not a wound to be nursed in private. This was a challenge that had to be met on a public battlefield. She saved the image to a secure folder on her desktop, renaming the file Exhibit A. She then looked at the newspaper's earnings report, still displayed on her other monitor, at the soaring subscription numbers and the advertising revenue. She looked at the photo of Kendra in her bed. An idea began to form a plan so audacious, so ruthless, that a slow, dangerous smile touched her lips. Clorinda had mistaken her composure for weakness. Kendra had mistaken her silence for ignorance. They were about to learn in the most public way imaginable that a Davenport never ever loses. They simply changed the rules of the game. The next morning, Elizabeth walked into the newsroom of the New York Chronicle with the poise of a conquering general. The cavernous space, usually humming with the controlled chaos of ringing phones and clacking keyboards, seemed to hold its breath as she passed. Her employees respected her, but they also feared her. They knew her eye for detail was relentless, and her standards were unforgiving. Today, however, her presence had a different weight. There was an electric charge in her wake. She ignored her spacious corner office and strode directly to the glass-walled conference room in the center of the floor, known colloquially as the War Room. She sent a curt message from her phone. "Frank, my office, now." Frank Miller was the paper's editor-in-chief, a grizzled veteran of journalism with ink in his veins and a healthy cynicism for the world. He had been a foreign correspondent, in his youth, had run a major London daily, and had seen everything, or so he thought. Conrad Davenport had hired him, but his loyalty was to Elizabeth. He admired her sharp intellect and her refusal to compromise on the paper's integrity. He entered the war room to find her standing before the large smartboard, her back to him. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice a low gravel. "What's the emergency? Is the governor finally getting indicted?" "Something more important," she said, turning to face him. Her face was a marble mask, betraying nothing. "Frank, I'm going to give you the biggest story of the year, a massive exclusive." Frank's journalistic instincts kicked in. He leaned forward, intrigued. "Bigger than the SEC investigation into Sterling Price?" "Infinitely," she replied. She tapped her tablet and the image from Kendra's Instagram story filled the giant screen. Frank stared at it. He recognized the bedroom immediately. He'd attended a fundraising dinner at the penthouse once. He recognized the Rothko. He saw the unfamiliar woman, the triumphant smirk, the nightgown. His eyes darted from the screen to Elizabeth's face, and for the first time in their professional relationship, he saw a crack in her composure. It wasn't sadness. It was something harder, something forged in fire. "My God, Elizabeth," he breathed. I'm so sorry." "Don't be," she said, her voice devoid of any self-pity. "I want you to run this." Frank blinked. "Run what? A gossip column piece. We can bury it in the lifestyle section, a blind item." "No." Elizabeth cut him off, her voice dropping to a deadly quiet. "Not a blind item. I want it on the front page, above the fold, a 4-column spread." Frank stared at her, dumbfounded. He thought he must have misheard. "The front page, Elizabeth. This is a private matter. It's beneath you. It's beneath the paper. We can't. We can and we will." She stated her authority absolute. "The headline will be Rosenthal's Bedroom Betrayal. Subheadline, An exclusive look inside the marriage of a New York power couple. We will use the photograph. We will name her. Kendra Shaw, curator. We will name him. Clorinda Rosenthal, architect. And we will quote from Ms. Harding's reports, factually and clinically. Dates, times, locations. No emotion. Just cold, hard facts." Frank felt a cold dread creep up his spine. This wasn't journalism. It was an execution. "Elizabeth, think about what you're asking. The legal exposure, for one. But more than that, the precedent. We'll look like a tabloid. We'll be using the power of this newspaper to settle a personal score. It's an abuse of power." "It is a use of power, Frank," she corrected him. "Power I have. Power he thought I wouldn't use. This woman, this Kendra, didn't just sleep with my husband. She broke into my home. She wore my clothes. She posed with my heritage and broadcast it. This was a public act of aggression, disguised as a private indiscretion. I am merely choosing to respond in the same public forum." "He's your husband, the father of your children," Frank protested, his voice rising. "They had 2 sons away at a boarding school in Switzerland. He stopped being my husband when he brought that woman into our home," Elizabeth said, the ice in her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "And he's about to find out what it means to be my enemy. As for the children, they need to learn that the Davenport name is not something you tarnish without consequence. This will be a painful lesson, but a necessary one." Frank paced the room, running a hand through his thinning grey hair. Everything in him screamed that this was wrong. It violated every ethical principle he had ever held. "I can't do it, Elizabeth. I won't sign off on it." Elizabeth's gaze didn't waver. "I'm not asking for your signature, Frank. I'm telling you what the front page will be for the day after tomorrow's edition. I am the publisher. This is my final decision. You can either direct your team to write the story of their careers with full access to the Veritas files, or you can tender your resignation. The choice is yours. But that photograph is running with or without you." She had him cornered, and they both knew it. His career, his staff, the paper he had helped rebuild it, was all on the line. He looked from her unyielding face to the grotesque image on the screen. He saw the smirk of the Mistress, and for a fleeting moment he understood Elizabeth's rage. It wasn't just about a cheating husband. It was about a fundamental violation of sanctuary. He let out a long, weary sigh, the fight draining out of him. "Give my reporters access to the files," he said, his voice heavy with defeat. "And God help us all." The following evening, the air in the penthouse was thick with unspoken truths. The machinery of the New York Chronicle was already in motion. A small, trusted team of journalists sequestered in the war room under Frank's reluctant supervision was drafting the article. The layout team was designing the front page. The legal department, under direct orders from Elizabeth, was preparing for the inevitable fallout. And at the center of the impending storm, Elizabeth was playing the part of the dutiful wife one last time. She had asked their private chef to prepare Clorinda's favorite meal, pan-seared scallops, with a saffron risotto, followed by a dry-aged ribeye. She chose a 1998 Chateau Margaux from the cellar, a wine they had saved for a special occasion. When Clorinda arrived home, he was in a buoyant mood. He had just secured a major contract, a new museum in Qatar, and he was full of his own success. He kissed Elizabeth on the cheek, the scent of the city, and his faint, familiar cologne clinging to him. He was oblivious, cocooned in his own self-satisfaction. "You won't believe the day I had Cat," he said, loosening his Brioni tie. The board loved the presentation. They called it visionary. We should celebrate. In fact, this dinner is perfect. "I thought you deserved it," Elizabeth said, her voice smooth as silk. She handed him a glass of wine. Her hand was perfectly steady. "You've been working so hard." They sat at the long, polished dining table, overlooking the glittering tapestry of the city. For an hour she let him talk. He spoke of concrete and steel, of glass facades and cantilevered balconies. He was charming, passionate, and utterly convincing. He was the man she had fallen in love with, and he was a complete stranger. She watched him studying his face, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his work. She felt a hollow ache where her love for him used to be. It was like looking at a beautiful ruin. "There's one more thing," Clorinda said, reaching for his wine glass. "I need to fly to the Hamptons this weekend. There's an issue with the foundation at the Henderson property. A survey team needs me there Saturday and Sunday. I'm sorry to miss our usual Sunday brunch." Elizabeth took a slow sip of her wine, the deep red liquid, a stark contrast to the icy composure in her veins. She already knew about this trip. Ms. Harding's latest report had included a reservation confirmation for 2 at a lavish seaside resort in Montauk under Kendra Shaw's name. "Of course, darling," she said, her smile never faltering. "Work comes first. We can have brunch any time." He smiled back, a relieved, grateful smile that twisted the knife in her gut. "You're the best, Cat." So understanding. As the evening wore on, a perverse sense of power settled over Elizabeth. She was the only person in the room who knew the truth. She was the keeper of a secret that was about to detonate their entire world. This dinner wasn't a meal. It was a wake. After they finished, Clorinda went to his study to take a call. Elizabeth walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the river of headlights on Fifth Avenue. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman in a simple black dress, her pearls gleaming softly, her expression serene. She looked every bit the part of the billionaire's daughter, the perfect hostess, the supportive wife. But her eyes held a new, hard light. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from Frank. It was a PDF of the final proof for the front page. She opened it. The headline was stark, brutal, in the paper's bold, authoritative font, Rosenthal's bedroom betrayal. Beneath it, the photograph was huge, taking up half the page. Kendra in her bed, under her Rothko, smirking out at the world. The image was grainy, captured from a phone, which only made it feel more illicit, more real. The subheadline and the first few lines of the article were laid out beneath. It was a masterpiece of character assassination, all the more devastating for its cold, factual tone. Elizabeth stared at the proof, at the culmination of her pain and her rage now codified in print. This was the point of no return. With a single tap, she could stop it. She could delete the file, call Frank, and tell him to kill the story. She could confront Clorinda privately, go through a quiet, civilized divorce, and preserve the facade. But why should she be the one to be quiet? Why should she be the one to protect him from the consequences of his own choices? He had brought the vulgarity of his affair into her sanctuary. She would now bring the cold, hard light of public scrutiny into his... She typed a 2-word reply to Frank Miller. Run it. Before the sun had even touched the tips of the city's tallest spires, the war had already been won. It was won in the rumbling bellies of the Chronicle's delivery trucks as they fanned out across the 5 boroughs, their headlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. It was won in the quiet thud of tightly bound newspapers landing on the marble steps of Park Avenue townhouses and the metal grates of downtown newsstands. It was a declaration of war delivered to 1 million doorsteps, an ambush executed while the enemy was still asleep. As the city stirred, the first digital alerts began to chime. Commuters staring into their phones on the 6 train saw the headline, "First, their sleepy-eyed scrolling jolted to a halt." In coffee shops from the financial district to the Upper West Side, the low murmur of morning conversation was punctuated by sharp intakes of breath and whispered exclamations. The story spread like a neural impulse through the city's consciousness, a digital wildfire leaping from screen to screen. By the time the sun was fully up, casting a deceptively peaceful golden glow on the metropolis, the Davenport-Rosenthal scandal was the only thing anyone was talking about. Clorinda Rosenthal, blissfully unaware, began his day with the rituals of a man at the top of his world. A steaming hot shower, the careful selection of a bespoke navy suit, the precise knotting of a silk Brioni tie. He was humming softly, his mind already on the Qatar Museum project, feeling the familiar thrum of ambition and success. He stepped out of the private elevator into the grand lobby, ready to conquer another day. The first sign of the encroaching disaster was Patrick the doorman. For 30 years, Patrick had greeted him with a cheerful, top-of-the-morning Mr. Rosenthal. Today, the old Irishman seemed to shrink into his uniform. He busied himself with polishing an already gleaming brass handle, his eyes fixed on the floor as he handed Clorinda the morning papers. "Morning, sir," he mumbled the words thick with an emotion Clorinda couldn't place. "Pity." Clorinda took the stack his wife's paper on top, as always, and gave a distracted nod. The oddness of the encounter barely registered as he slid into the cool leather interior of his waiting town car. He instructed his driver to head to the office and casually unfolded the Chronicle, and his meticulously constructed world fractured, shattered, and then incinerated. It wasn't a gradual realization. It was an instant total system shock. The image Kendra in their bed beneath their Rothko, with that triumphant, intimate smirk, hit him with the force of a physical impact, knocking the air from his lungs. His brain struggled to process the cognitive dissonance, a secret, private transgression displayed for public consumption on a scale he couldn't comprehend. The headline, "Rosenthal's Bedroom Betrayal," seemed to vibrate on the page, the massive block letters screaming his shame. His hands began to tremble, the crisp newsprint rattling in the silent car. He forced his eyes to read the text below. Clorinda Rosenthal, the celebrated architect and husband of publisher Elizabeth Davenport Rosenthal, has been engaged in a months-long affair. The words were clinical, detached, and utterly damning. It listed dates, hotels. It even mentioned the upcoming weekend in Montauk. This wasn't an accusation. It was a verdict complete with a detailed appendix of his sins. A hot, suffocating wave of nausea and panic rose in his throat. How his phone buzzed violently against the seat. It was his business partner, James. He ignored it. It buzzed again. His lawyer, then his mother. Her name flashing on the screen sent a jolt of pure horror through him. He couldn't answer. He could only stare at the newspaper, a testament to his own stupidity, a monument to a catastrophic miscalculation. He had thought his wife was made of glass. He had just discovered she was made of diamond-hard weaponized steel. Across town, in a chic, minimalist art gallery in Chelsea, Kendra Shaw was experiencing her own version of the apocalypse. She arrived at work 10 minutes late, a soy latte in hand, feeling smug and victorious. Her little Instagram post had been a masterstroke, a perfectly calibrated bit of pressure on Clorinda. She imagined him seeing it, feeling a jolt of jealous panic, realizing he couldn't keep her a secret forever. She pushed open the heavy glass door of the gallery and was met not with the usual hum of quiet industry, but with a thick, suffocating silence. The two interns at the front desk stopped whispering and stared at their computers. Her colleagues further down the long, white room glanced at her, and then quickly looked away, their faces a mixture of morbid fascination and contempt. Her boss, a formidable, impeccably dressed woman named Genevieve, emerged from her office. Her expression was glacial. Kendra. My office. Now, a cold dread began to seep into Kendra's confidence. She followed Genevieve into the stark, white office. Spread across the large glass desk, like a piece of obscene artwork, was the front page of the Chronicle. "Explain this," Genevieve said, her voice dangerously low. "Explain why my gallery's name and your title are on the front page of a newspaper, next to a photograph of you in another woman's bed. A woman, I might add, whose family is one of the biggest art patrons in this city." Kendra stared at her own face, her private little victory, now a public spectacle of humiliation. The narrative she thought she was controlling had been hijacked. The article didn't portray her as a powerful seductress who had captured a great man. It clinically identified her as Chelsea art curator Kendra Shaw, reducing her to a tawdry footnote in the implosion of a power couple's marriage. She was no longer a player, she was evidence. She had sought notoriety and had been granted infamy. "Genevieve, I can explain," she stammered, her mind racing. "No, you can't," Genevieve cut her off coldly. "You have brought a vulgar tabloid scandal to my door. Our clients value discretion above all else. You are suspended indefinitely, effective immediately. Security will escort you out." Meanwhile, Elizabeth Davenport Rosenthal was not at the gym. She was in her library, the command center from which she had launched her attack. On a massive screen mounted on the wall, she wasn't watching the news. She was watching the data. Real-time analytics from the Chronicle's website painted a picture of her absolute success. Web traffic was at an all-time high. The story was the #1 trending topic on every social media platform. She watched the numbers climb, millions of page views, thousands of comments per minute, with the detached satisfaction of a general watching a perfectly executed artillery strike. Her personal phone, which had been silent all morning, finally rang. She looked at the screen. Clorinda. She let it ring once, twice, a third time. Then she picked it up, her posture, perfect, her voice, as calm and cool as the morning air. "Elizabeth." His voice was a raw, ragged shout, choked with panic and disbelief. "What have you done?" "You've ruined me. You've ruined us." "I think you'll find you did the ruining, Clorinda," she replied, her tone conversational, as if they were discussing a poor restaurant review. "I am simply reporting on it. This is insane. It's a personal matter. My mother called me crying. My partners think I'm a liability. You used your newspaper to attack me. I'll sue you. I'll sue the paper for libel." He yelled his words, tumbling over each other in a desperate torrent. "Will you?" Elizabeth's voice held a sliver of ice. "On what grounds? Is the photograph a fabrication? Were you not at the Mercer Hotel on the dates and times we listed? Is Ms. Shaw not your mistress? Tell me, Clorinda, which part of our meticulously researched story is untrue? Because my lawyers, the best lawyers your money, or rather my money can buy, assure me that the truth is an absolute defense. They are eagerly awaiting your call." A strangled sound came from his end of the line. He was sputtering, trapped in a cage of irrefutable facts. He had no defense. "You have a board meeting at 10. Clorinda," she continued, her voice now completely devoid of any emotion. "I imagine your partners will have some questions. I would advise you to prepare a statement. Oh, and one more thing. Your clothes and personal effects are being packed by a professional service as we speak. They will be delivered to your office by noon. Do not attempt to come back to the apartment. The locks have been changed. The security staff has been given your photograph and instructed not to allow you on the premises. Consider this your official notice of eviction." She paused, letting the finality of her words sink into the silence. Before he could muster a response, before he could plead or curse or beg, she ended the call. In the back of his town car, Clorinda stared at the dead phone in his hand, the single final beep of the disconnected line echoing the end of his entire existence. He was no longer Clorinda Rosenthal, visionary architect. He was a headline, a scandal, a fool. And he was homeless. His wife hadn't just divorced him. She had deleted him. The initial explosion of the story was exactly as Elizabeth had designed it, total, indiscriminate, and spectacular. For 72 hours, Clorinda Rosenthal and Kendra Shaw were the most reviled names in New York City. The photograph was a viral contagion, spreading through every phone and computer screen, a modern-day scarlet letter. But Elizabeth, a student of power, knew that public outrage was a fickle beast. Without a second act, the story would burn itself out, leaving behind only the ash of gossip. She knew Clorinda's ego would not allow him to simply crumble. He would fight back. She was counting on it. His counteroffensive began on a Tuesday. He hired Leonard Pierce, a lawyer who was less a practitioner of law and more a master of televised perception. Pierce was handsome, silver-tongued, and possessed a unique talent for framing villains as victims. He made his debut on a prime-time cable news show, his expression a perfect blend of solemnity and outrage. "Let's be clear about what this is," Pierce said, looking directly into the camera, his voice resonating with conviction. "This is not journalism. This is a vendetta printed on 1,000,000 pieces of paper by a woman of immense power and privilege." Elizabeth Davenport didn't like that her husband's eye had wandered, so she weaponized a media empire to publicly humiliate him. Is that ethical? Is that the action of a stable individual? Mr. Rosenthal is a broken man, not because of an indiscretion, but because his wife has chosen to use the power of the press as a tool of domestic abuse. The narrative began to shift. Rival newspapers eager to challenge the Chronicle's dominance picked up Pierce's angle. Headlines changed from focusing on Clorinda's betrayal to questioning Elizabeth's methods. Davenport's war journalism or jealousy, asked one. Heiress's revenge. A dangerous precedent, blared another. Talk shows convened panels to debate the ethics of it all. Clorinda, carefully coached by Pierce, was kept out of sight, cultivating an image of a man devastated by his wife's unhinged wrath. In the Chronicle's newsroom, a nervous energy took hold. Frank Miller brought a stack of the competing papers to Elizabeth's office, his face etched with worry. "They're turning it, Elizabeth," he said, spreading them on her desk. "They're making you the villain. This could do lasting damage to the paper's credibility." Elizabeth glanced at the headlines, her expression unreadable. She took a slow sip of her tea. "Let them," she said calmly. "Let them build him up. Let them convince the world he is the wronged party. A cornered animal will always lash out. Clorinda is just building his own cage." Frank looked at her, baffled by her serenity, but he saw in her eyes a strategic patience that was more unsettling than any outburst of anger. She was playing a longer game, one whose rules only she seemed to understand. A week later, while the city was still debating the scandal, Miss Harding requested an in-person meeting. She arrived at the penthouse, quiet and unobtrusive as ever, holding a single slim file bound in simple black leather. Our work was technically concluded. Mrs. Rosenthal, the private investigator, began her tone neutral. However, in cross-referencing Mr. Rosenthal's financial records to verify expenses related to Ms. Shaw, our forensic accounting team found a pattern they described as deeply troubling. It goes beyond the initial mandate of infidelity. She placed the file on the polished mahogany desk in Elizabeth's library. Elizabeth opened it. The first few pages were what she expected: receipts for extravagant gifts for Kendra, a Cartier bracelet, a weekend at a spa in Monaco, charges that stung with their casual profligacy. But then she turned a page, and the report shifted to the Rosenthal Foundation. Her posture, which had been relaxed, stiffened. She leaned closer, her eyes scanning the columns of numbers, the intricate diagrams of wire transfers. The report detailed a systematic siphoning of funds. Small amounts at first, then larger and larger sums moved from the Foundation's endowment into a series of opaque shell corporations. From there, the money trail led to a single destination, a high-risk boutique venture capital fund called Shoreline Equities. The name hit her like a physical blow. The report's appendix contained a profile of the fund's managing partner, Dylan Shaw, Kendra's older brother. The air left Elizabeth's lungs. This was a betrayal so monstrous it dwarfed the vulgarity of the affair. Clorinda hadn't just cheated on her. He had stolen from their legacy. He had plundered a charity they had built to provide art programs for children in the city's poorest neighborhoods, children with nothing, and used the money to gamble on a get-rich-quick scheme with his mistress's family. The affair, the sneaking around the lies. It was all a gaudy, pathetic distraction from the real crime. He hadn't just defiled her bed. He had desecrated their shared purpose. A glacial cold settled deep in her bones, a clarity so absolute it was almost peaceful. The rage was gone, replaced by a sense of profound and utter disgust. This was no longer about a broken heart. This was about a moral cancer that had to be excised. She closed the file. "Thank you, Miss Harding. Your firm's discretion has been exemplary. Please send me the final invoice." The next morning, Elizabeth met with her legal team. She laid out the file. Her lead counsel, a seasoned litigator, read it and whistled softly. "This is a kill shot, Elizabeth. We leak this to the Chronicle, and he's finished before lunch." "No, Elizabeth," said her voice cutting through the room. "A newspaper article is too public, too messy. This requires a different kind of instrument. A scalpel, not a sledgehammer." She outlined her plan, her instructions precise. "We will schedule a meeting here tomorrow under the pretense of discussing divorce settlement terms. I want Clorinda and Leonard Pierce to walk into this room believing they have won the public relations war. I want them to be arrogant. Let them make their demands. The higher he flies, the harder he will fall." The following afternoon, Clorinda and his lawyer arrived at the law firm's Midtown offices. They strode into the boardroom with the palpable confidence of men who believed they held all the cards. Clorinda looked haggard, but carried himself with a renewed swagger. Elizabeth Pierce began forgoing any pleasantry as he set his briefcase on the table with a loud click. "My client is prepared to be reasonable, despite the immense emotional and professional damage you have inflicted upon him. We are here to discuss the terms of your surrender, not his." He slid a piece of paper across the table. "We are demanding a public apology and a full retraction from the Chronicle 50% of all marital assets, which our accountants value at approximately $500 million and the immediate sale of your shares in Rosenthal Architects back to my client for the sum of $1. In return, he will sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding your recent erratic behavior. Elizabeth listened to the audacious demands without a flicker of emotion. When he was finished, a heavy silence filled the room. She let it hang in the air for a long moment before she leaned forward and slid the slim black file across the table. An impressive offer, Mr. Pierce, she said, her voice dangerously soft. But I have a counter-proposal. Before we discuss my erratic behavior, perhaps you'd both like to review the Q3 and Q4 financial statements for the Rosenthal Foundation. I've taken the liberty of highlighting the relevant wire transfers to a firm called Shoreline Equities. Clorinda's confident smirk faltered. He opened the folder. As he read the first page, the color drained from his face. He frantically flipped through the pages, seeing the undeniable proof of his crimes laid out in cold, black and white print. His hands began to shake. He looked up, not at his lawyer, but at Elizabeth, his eyes wide with a dawning primal terror. She met his gaze, her expression a placid void. "These two gentlemen," she said, gesturing to two stone-faced men sitting quietly in the corner of the room, whom Clorinda had barely noticed, are from the white-collar crime unit of the district attorney's office. "They are very interested in your visionary financial strategies, Clorinda." Leonard Pierce snatched the file, his own face turning ashen as he quickly grasped the totality of his client's doom. All the bluster, all the PR savvy evaporated. He was no longer a media strategist. He was the lawyer for a common thief. "The district attorney's office is prepared to offer you a deal." Clorinda Elizabeth continued, her voice the calm center of his personal hurricane. "You will plead guilty to 1 count of felony embezzlement. You will sign a divorce settlement in which you forfeit all marital assets, trusts, and holdings. You will walk away from this marriage with nothing but the clothes you are wearing and your personal debts. In return for your full and immediate cooperation, I will ask the DA to recommend a reduced sentence. If you refuse," she paused, letting the weight of her words settle, "I will not only pursue the full extent of these charges, but I will also file a civil suit for fraud that will financially obliterate what's left of your family for generations. Your mistress and her brother will also be named as co-conspirators and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The choice is yours." She rose from her chair, her movements fluid and deliberate. "You have 1 hour to decide. I'll be in my office." The heavy oak door of the boardroom clicked shut, leaving a vacuum of silence in its wake. Clorinda Rosenthal was gone, a ghost exorcised from the premises, leaving behind nothing but the faint scent of his expensive cologne and the ghost of his signature on a stack of papers that effectively erased him from existence. His lawyer, Leonard Pierce, had scurried out after him, a man utterly defeated, his bravado stripped away to reveal the hollow core of a hired gun who had just been comprehensively outmatched. Elizabeth remained seated at the head of the vast, polished table. She didn't move. Her lawyers and the men from the district attorney's office began to gather their papers, speaking in low, respectful murmurs. One of her attorneys, an older man who had served her father for 40 years, approached her cautiously. "Elizabeth," he said gently, "it's done. You won." She looked up at him, her eyes clear and focused. The words, "I won," seemed insufficient, a child's term for a game. This hadn't been a game. It had been a vivisection. She had methodically taken a scalpel to her own life, cut out the diseased parts, and sutured the wound herself. Victory was not triumphant. It was sterile. "See that the documents are filed within the hour," she instructed, her voice even. "And please convey my gratitude to the DA's office for their discretion." That evening she returned to the penthouse. The silence that greeted her was different now. Before it had been a silence of tension, of unspoken accusations. Now it was a silence of pure, unadulterated emptiness. Every trace of Clorinda had been professionally removed. His books were gone from the shelves, his clothes from the closets, his photos from the silver frames. The cavernous space, once a shared stage for their life, was now just a property. A beautiful hollow shell. She walked through the rooms, her footsteps echoing on the marble floors. She stopped in the doorway of the master bedroom, her gaze falling on the Rothko. The painting that had been the backdrop for her humiliation was now a silent monument to her retribution. The deep, turbulent reds no longer spoke of her grandfather's legacy or her marital intimacy. They spoke of fire and blood and the scorched earth policy that had secured her freedom. She felt no lingering pain, only the cold, hard finality of a chapter, closed with extreme prejudice. A few days later, Frank Miller stood in her office at the Chronicle, a tangible unease about him. The DA's office just filed the charge against Rosenthal, he said, holding a slip of paper from the wire service. 1 count of felony misappropriation. He's pleading guilty. How do you want to play it? He braced himself for the answer. Front page again. Rosenthal the bandit. Elizabeth looked up from a budget report, a faint, unreadable smile on her lips. No, Frank. The front page was for my war. This is just business. She leaned back in her chair. This isn't a personal story anymore. It's a business brief. I want a 2-column article, 500 words, fact-based. No photo of Clorinda. No mention of me or our marriage beyond the necessary context of the Foundation's name. Run it on page A14 below the fold. Frank stared at her, a slow understanding dawning on his face. This was a more sophisticated form of cruelty. To scream his betrayal from the front page was an act of passion. To bury his criminal conviction in the back pages like an insignificant market correction, that was an act of pure contemptuous power. It communicated that he was no longer important enough to warrant her rage. He was merely a tedious piece of bookkeeping. That's cold, Elizabeth, he finally said, a note of awe in his voice. It's clean, she corrected him. This paper's integrity is paramount. We reported a crime. Justice was served. We move on. She did move on. As Clorinda's name faded into a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties, and Kendra Shaw vanished entirely after her brother's firm collapsed under federal investigation, Elizabeth re-emerged. Her first public appearance was at the annual library fundraising gala, an event she had once chaired with Clorinda. When she entered the ballroom, a hush fell over the glittering crowd. The whispers died. Every eye was on her. She felt their fear, their morbid curiosity, their pity. She ignored it all, moving through the room with the unassailable grace of a monarch. An old acquaintance, a woman named Beatrice, who thrived on the misfortunes of others, cornered her by the champagne fountain. Elizabeth, darling, she purred, her eyes gleaming with false sympathy. How are you holding up? It must be just dreadful. Elizabeth turned her full attention to the woman, her gaze so direct and chilling that Beatrice visibly flinched. I'm perfectly well, thank you. Beatrice Elizabeth said, her voice quiet but carrying the force of a slammed door. The Chronicle's profits, on the other hand, are more than well. They're spectacular. She gave a small, sharp nod and walked away, leaving the woman speechless. The message was clear to everyone watching. She was not a subject for gossip. She was not a victim. She was the one who controlled the narrative. 6 months later, the transformation was complete. The penthouse on Fifth Avenue was still her address, but the newsroom of the New York Chronicle was her home. It was her fortress, her war room, her kingdom. The paper's circulation had shattered all previous records. It had become the most influential and feared media outlet in the nation precisely because everyone knew its publisher was utterly ruthless and had nothing left to lose. Elizabeth stood with Frank before the smart board, analyzing the layout for the next day's front page. It was a devastating exposé on a corrupt U.S. senator, built on months of meticulous investigation. It's airtight, Elizabeth Frank said, his tone one of a trusted field marshal. He won't survive it. He shouldn't, she replied, her focus absolute. She circled a weak quote with a red marker. The public deserves to know who they elected. Replace this with the source from the banking committee. I want it to hit harder. Just then, her phone vibrated with a private message. She glanced down. It was from the headmaster of her son's school in Switzerland. Attached was a photograph of her 2 boys, rosy-cheeked and laughing on a sun-drenched ski slope, their arms around each other. For a brief moment, the ice around her heart thawed. A wave of fierce, protective love washed over her. They were safe. They were happy. They were untouched by the filth she had waded through to secure their world. This was why she had done it. She had amputated their father from their lives to save them from his poison. She typed a quick reply and put the phone away. The brief softness in her eyes vanished, replaced by the cool, calculating gaze of the publisher. She looked out from the glass walls of the conference room, across the humming, vibrant newsroom that was now the true source of her identity. The pain of Clorinda's betrayal had been a crucible, burning away the superfluous woman she had been and forging the formidable one she had become. She had taken the most intimate act of humiliation and converted it into an empire. She had turned a wound into a weapon and a headline into a throne. They thought they could break into her home and tarnish her name. They forgot that she owned the paper that wrote the first draft of history, and in her story, Elizabeth Davenport always wrote the ending. And so, a story of private pain became a public spectacle, a lesson written in newsprint for the entire world to read. This wasn't just a tale of a cheating husband and a vengeful wife. It was a masterclass in power control and the terrifying precision of a woman who refused to be a victim. Elizabeth Davenport Rosenthal used the very weapons of her gilded cage, her wealth, her influence, her media empire, to not only expose a betrayal, but to redefine her own narrative. She turned a wound into a weapon and a headline into a throne. What would you have done in her position? Was her response a brilliant act of justice or a chilling abuse of power? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of secrets, lies, and ultimate revenge, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a story where the Queen saves herself, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the dramatic lives of the world's most powerful people. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update.